I will request all of you to put your mobile in the silent mode. Even flight mode will do. Our last year's, this is the 15th Tarkunde Memorial Lecture we are holding. Our last year's speaker was Honorable the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud Sahab. The day he retired, I sent him a couplet which is more applicable to many of our very senior friends sitting in this audience. That couplet was, लहजे को जरा देख जवां है कि नहीं है, लहजे को जरा देख जवां है कि नहीं है, बालों की सफेदी को बुढ़ापा नहीं कहते. And this is also very much applicable to Mr. Javed Sahab, who's also come in this, has joined us today. Let me start with another couplet which I want to dedicate to Mr. V.M. Tarkunde, in whose memory we are hosting this 15th Tarkunde Memorial Lecture. This is a very simple one, all of you will understand. न साथ देंगी यह दम तोड़ती हुई शम्माएं, न साथ देंगी यह दम तोड़ती हुई शम्माएं, नए चराग जलाओ कि रोशनी कम है. I welcome all of you on behalf of our President, Justice Madan Lokur, our Vice President, Mr. Raju Ramachandran, our Secretary, Mrs. Manik Karanjawala, and also the members of the Tarkunde Memorial Foundation for the 15th Tarkunde Memorial Lecture, which is being delivered today by Ms. Nirja Chaudhary, eminent journalist and author. You know, she can sense and she can know what prime ministers of this country feel. All of you must have read her book. And the topic chosen by her is very interesting: the electoral process and the idea of one nation, one election. I now have a very pleasant duty to perform. I request Mrs. Tahira Karanjawala, granddaughter of late Mr. Tarkunde, to present a bouquet to our chief guest, Ms. Nirja Chaudhary. I will request Mr. Ashok Panda, senior advocate who had a very long association with Mr. Tarkunde, to come and give a bouquet to our president, Mr. Madan Bhimrao Lokur. I will now request Mr. Kishan Kumar Gogna, who had a very long association with Mr. Tarkunde, to give a bouquet to our Vice President, Mr. Raju Ramachandran. Before I invite Mr. Raju Ramachandran Sahab for introducing our speaker, and also let me share this couplet. And you know this, what it is, in this let me just explain two words. दानाओं जो कहते हैं वो वाइज मैन को कहते हैं, एंड ऑल पीपल ऑफ जो रूल करते हैं कंट्री को हमेशा वाइज ही होते हैं. तो समवन हैज सेड, हमको आपस में मोहब्बत नहीं करने देते, हमको आपस में मोहब्बत नहीं करने देते, एक यही ऐब है इस शहर के दानाओं में. एंड मिस्टर राजू रामाचंद्रन.
Sorry?
What's his name? Ejaz.
Ejaz. Maqbool.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. My generation has grown up with Vitthal Mahadev Tarkunde as a hero and as a role model. But let me introduce him to the next generation. Tarkunde was born on 3rd July 1909 in the Pune district of Maharashtra. He stood first in the matriculation examination of 1925 in the whole of Bombay Presidency. Party was dissolved in 1948. Tarkunde returned to legal practice the same year, that is 1948, and with his acumen soon made a mark. And so within 9 years of his return to practice, in September 1957, he was appointed a judge of the Bombay High Court. And it is said of the late Tarkunde that he was the most eminent judge of the post-Chagla Bombay High Court. He stepped down from judgeship at 60, though the retirement age had already been raised to 62, and started practice in the Supreme Court. And along with this practice, he plunged into public life. He founded the Indian Radical Humanist Association in 1969, and he began editing the Radical Humanist Journal. Radical humanism was a philosophy expounded by his mentor, M.N. Roy. During the emergency, he worked closely with Jayaprakash Narayan and provided leadership to two prominent NGOs, the People's Union of Civil Liberties and Citizens for Democracy. He also worked on the Citizens Justice Committee and played a major role in investigating excesses in the 1980s, including the 1984 anti-Sikh riots and human rights violations in Punjab, Kashmir, and the Northeast. In his legal practice, he was always available for the causes of the downtrodden and for civil liberties, and is often referred to as the father of the civil liberties movement in India. He was awarded the Padma Bhushan in 1998. Writing about Tarkunde, Fali Nariman said, "He was almost like no other lawyer, a moral human being. After all, consistency of the moral dimension is the true measure of greatness in every soul. Tarkunde was a great soul." Our speaker this evening, Ms. Neerja Chaudhary, is an award-winning journalist, columnist, and political commentator whose career spans almost 5 decades. She cut her teeth in journalism working with the news weekly Himmat during the emergency. The editor-in-chief was none other than Raj Mohan Gandhi. And Himmat was among the few papers and journals which resisted the press censorship during the emergency. And after the emergency, she was active in the PUCL, which is when she met Tarkunde first. She has won prestigious awards over the years for her journalism and is one of India's foremost political analysts and columnists today. She is contributing editor to the Indian Express and writes the very widely read Neerja Chaudhary column in that paper. And you've already been told about her recent book, How Prime Ministers Decide, which is a bestseller. In 1982, as a young journalist, she joined the Statesman as their first and only civil rights correspondent. And for 5 years, she wrote on issues which were dear to Tarkunde's heart. Issues like child labor, bonded labor, dowry deaths, the plight of under-trials, and the rights of women. There is a reported judgment, Neerja Chaudhary versus State of Madhya Pradesh, 1984, where she asked for strict implementation of the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act, and that petition was allowed. That act, of course, protected the right to life under Article 21, apart from effectuating Article 23, which prohibits begar. Neerja ji, Today, I find myself using that case, Nirja Chaudhary versus State of Madhya Pradesh, as a precedent for urging the Supreme Court to strictly implement the Places of Worship Act 1993, an act which seeks to preserve the secular fabric of the Republic and the rule of law. Nirja ji.
Justice Madan Lokur, Mr. Raju Ramachandran, Ejaz ji, other members of the Tarkunde Memorial Foundation, and Manik and Ryan Karanjawala, who have been old friends of mine after I got to know Justice Tarkunde in those years. So it's a very special moment to be here for me. All that you talked about introducing me, it seems, years and years and years ago, just say, it's something in the past that you'd forgotten about. But those were incredible days. I will say it is a special honor for me to be asked to give the VM Tarkunde Memorial Lecture today. When I came to Delhi in 1977 from Mumbai, where, as you said, I'd cut my teeth in journalism, working on the Himmat Weekly, started by Rajamohan Gandhi, the atmosphere was upbeat in Delhi. The Janata Party had defeated Indira Gandhi. The emergency was a thing of the past. Press censorship press freedoms had been restored. The judiciary had heaved a sigh of relief. And certain amendments violative of fundamental rights had been undone. And the PUCL, as you just said, had decided to bring out a newsletter, and I was part of the team to bring it out. And I remember Arun Jaitley was part of it, and many others were part of it. And we would meet at the home of the late Inder Mohan at Gold Market, acutely conscious of the need to strengthen civil liberties in the country. And suddenly, after the dark night, the sun was shining again. It was at that time that I met Justice V.M. Tarkunde. He was really, you're right, he was really the hero of many, and truly a father of the civil liberties movement in India. That is absolutely well put. And an inspiring presence, and always, always accessible when you wanted to see him, despite his very busy schedule. So when Manik asked me to speak on the electoral process and one nation, one election, this was several weeks ago. Neither of us knew what a live and contentious issue it would become by December 20th, that is today. Of course, that the bill tabled in Lok Sabha, now sent to the JPC, so contentious that even its introduction called for a vote in the House. And of course, as we know, the JPC is expected to report in 3 months. It can, of course, extend its term. But the Constitution 129th Amendment Bill and the Union Territories Laws Amendment Bill 2024, if they are passed, will enable the synchronization of the Lok Sabha and State Assembly elections. The first one calls for a constitutional amendment. The second one, which is supposed to align polls in Delhi, Puducherry, and Jammu and Kashmir with the general elections, does not require that. Can be passed by a simple majority, I'm told. and the plan to hold elections to the local bodies, the municipal corporations and the panchayati institutions within 100 days has not yet been brought. I'm told that would have entailed ratification by 50% of the states. Of course, several opposition leaders have demanded that the first bill also, that is to synchronize polls, has to be ratified by half the states. Let's see what happens. And all this will, I'm sure, go to the judiciary for its rulings. Even as the Prime Minister has put his weight behind the idea since he came to power in 2014, this time the ruling combined does not have the 2/3 majority required to pass the bill. It may try and mobilize support during the pendency of the JPC and try and bring around some other naysayers, parties, if the JPC suggests certain amendments. As the bill is worded, simultaneous elections cannot be rolled out before 2034. Why then has the BJP been in a hurry to go ahead with such a landmark venture, particularly if it does not have the numbers to push through with it? That is a question many of us have been asking. Some say, is it optics? That it is going to continue, that the party is going to continue to pursue grand, bhavya themes that the PM is committed to? Or is it a deflective ploy to shift attention from other embarrassing developments the party was confronted with? You know, strange are the ways of our politics, as you know. Yesterday's shocking and unprecedented and ugly visuals of scuffles between MPs in Parliament. I have never seen such scenes and such bitterness between the two sides in the 40 or more years that I have covered Parliament and written about politics. Of course, but those incidents yesterday made us forget what had happened the previous day. That went into the background. That was Mr. Amit Shah's problematic references to B.R. Ambedkar, which had the entire opposition on the war path. Many of the opposition parties, including the Congress and regional groups like the TMC, Samajwadi Party, DMK, have opposed the One Nation, One Election bill. They fear it will go against the federal spirit ensured by the Constitution and alter its basic structure, and thereby affect the nature of democracy in the country as we have known it, pushing towards a unitary form of government, all to the advantage of the ruling party. So there are two sides to this story, and I will deal with them in a moment. But there may be a third point of view also, and I want to draw your attention to that first. Only the other day, a villager in UP, I was talking to him, and we happened to be talking about One Nation, One Election, and he said to me immediately, तो वो हमारे पास 5 साल तक नहीं आएंगे, मुंह नहीं दिखाएंगे क्या? चुनाव की वजह से आते तो रहते हैं. He said, आते हैं फिर 10 महीने बाद दोबारा आते हैं और हम बताते हैं उन्हें कि या हमने आपसे ये कहा था, उसका आधा काम हो गया, आधा अभी रहता है, तो वो फिर अपने लोगों को टिक टिकाते हैं. So what he was saying, and this I've heard not just in UP, I've heard in other states, Haryana, Maharashtra, from ordinary people, a similar sentiment that they would like their leaders to come back to them again and again. It is in their interest for them to keep the leaders on their toes and ensure a greater accountability of the ruler to the public. That is the way ordinary people, many ordinary people in India view it. On the other hand, for many of the leaders and rulers, elections are, and some of you are here, elections are hard work. And they have become increasingly harder to contest. And with scattered elections, the process is just unending. And with the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, and their colleagues, the entire cabinet, campaigning vigorously for elections, from the Lok Sabha to the municipalities, elections have become that much more non-stop and a harder slog. Elections are not what they were 15 years ago. Even before the 2024 elections, I remember, many of you will remember, the entire union cabinet was galvanized. Each minister was given specific constituencies to take care of, to nurture, and to deliver to the party, ensuring its victory. And I was thinking today, it now feels like another era when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was not expected to campaign much. He could continue here in South Block with his work. And I have heard several MPs say, "Chunav ne to hamari jaan hi nikal di." And when it comes to an end, they are very, very relieved. So for that reason, if truth be told, whatever their public positions, I think many of them might be relieved that they would have to go out and campaign only once in 5 years. But that's not so with the Aam Janta. They are far from fatigued by frequent elections, even though the politicians mention voter fatigue as one of the reasons from bringing the One Nation, One Election bill. For people to don their finery and queue up to cast their vote is a moment of celebration when they feel like the king or the queen. It is the rulers who come to them seeking them out at that time. And being able to vote is an empowering process for the citizen. To be able to have that sense, I can change the government. So the question is, from which end of the spectrum are you looking at the picture? The Praja's end or the Raja's end? The government says that clubbing the elections together may make the administrative arrangements easier and cut down costs. This is quite possible. But logistically, it will be a humongous exercise in terms of arrangements, and a very large number of people would have to be trained to do this, and a larger than usual number of security personnel deployed to make sure that polls take place without violence and are free and fair. If the Election Commission of India was unable recently to hold elections in the 4 states of Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, Jharkhand and Maharashtra simultaneously, as normally happens, how, and this is a question many people are asking, critics are asking, how will it conduct elections for the Lok Sabha, plus 28 state assemblies, plus 8 union territories, with some states requiring elections to be held in 5, 6, or 7 phases, as we have seen? Are we really ready for it? Even though the Election Commission says they are ready for it. Besides the security personnel, the Election Commission will need many more EVMs. A total of, I'm told, rupees 92.84 billion will be needed for acquiring new voting machines if simultaneous elections are to be held. This is according to a report of the Law and Justice Ministry. Why? My question is this, and I don't know what others will have to, and this has been mooted in recent days and weeks. Why not consider delinking the Lok Sabha polls from the assembly elections and hold the assembly elections in maybe in 2 phases, and the local elections separately? But then this will require a consensus to be evolved nationally. And these are not times known for consensus, nor are there many consensus creators in our political life today. Now, the BJP has said that 800 days of governance time was lost in the last 5 years because of frequent elections when the model code of conduct kicked in and led to a policy paralysis as far as the development and welfare projects went. Again, partly true, but there is also a flip side. And that is that polls which lend an urgency to the ruling party to deliver with dispatch something it would not show in normal times. And I asked this, I was in Maharashtra covering the elections recently, and I was amazed at, thank you, I was amazed traveling in Mumbai and Marathwada that I did not meet a single woman, not a single woman who had not got 7,500 rupees in her hand. Again, I went talked to senior officials in Mantralaya there, and they used the same words, that it was traumatic rolling out that scheme, but it was done. Hamari jaan nikal di is again the phrase they use. So, if the operationalization of the game-changing Ladki Behan Yojana in Maharashtra is anything to go by, few schemes have been implemented with a kind of speed or efficiency than this one, putting 7,000 rupees in the hands of 2.4 crore women in just a little over 4 months. It showed that when they want, the government can implement projects speedily and efficiently and find a way to do it no matter what the constraints. This would not be the case, however, in non-election time. Very unlikely to be the case that they show this kind of energy and drive in non-election time. The major concern of the opposition, however, is over the one nation, one election's impact on federalism. They fear that a general election is bound to overawe the state elections that are held at the same time, that national issues will get precedence over local ones, and of course concerns that if, say, the national government loses its majority midway, and a midterm poll has to be called, it could curtail the mandate of all the state governments in order to keep them aligned with the central government. And of course, if a state government falls halfway into its term, and this is indicated in the law, and elections are held, it will be a mini government that is formed and be in the saddle only for the remaining term, the unexpired remaining term. So, अगर 2.5 साल के बाद सरकार गिर जाती है, 2.5 साल रहते हैं, तो and the election is held, either of course if the government falls you can have president's rule, but if not, if elections are held and the new government is formed, that new government is not going to be there for 5 years. It's going to be a truncated government for the remaining time, 2.5 years or whatever it be. And if there is a popular national leader like Modi, many in the opposition fear clubbed elections are likely to favor him or her in both the national and state elections. This could be to the advantage of the national parties overall and go against the regional groups And this whole process, they fear, is slowly going to weaken them. The rise of the regional parties over the years and over the decades has reflected the growing regional and local aspirations which have not been met by national outfits getting reflected in our politics. And it is a very important element in a society as diverse as ours. In the consultations that the Law Commission held with political parties on One Nation, One Election in 2017, the sharpest reaction to the proposed bill had come from the southern states. And of course, we've heard leaders like M.K. Stalin, Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, exercised over it. He's expressed himself very sharply against this proposed bill. But I ask this question, that as it is, the southern states are exercised about the delimitation exercise, which is due in 2026. I don't know, it may get postponed. Why go in for something now that will deepen the north-south fault lines in the country? We can do without that. My problem with the ONOE, One Nation, One Election, is that it does not go far enough. It concentrates mainly on changing the timeline of elections, but not on the urgently needed, far-reaching poll reforms which it should explore seriously. Now that Narendra Modi has decided to bite the bullet, and he likes to do things big, so now is the time for poll reforms. There is the need to address the growing domination of big money influencing our elections. I mean, we all know it. Anybody, we who cover politics as media people, those of you who are in politics and know what the reality is. And of course, its linkages with the kind of role the MPs, MLAs, and governments are called to play as a result. You know, I was recalling the late Krishan Kant, who went on to become the country's vice president. He had once said that the MPs and MLAs started off being representatives of the people in the 50s and the 60s, then went on to become advocates, and finally graduated to being dalals and brokers. The CM of a southern state revealed recently in private that the money spent on a Lok Sabha election, one Lok Sabha seat, was on an average rupees 40 crores. And for an MLA, it was around rupees 25 crores. This will not be talked about publicly, but that is the reality. The money spent on the EC's, Election Commission's administration of elections, is peanuts compared to the overall money that is spent by parties and candidates in our elections today, making them less than fair and free. And it is this aspect of money, what is being called cost-cutting, which needs greater and immediate attention. We know how the idea of electoral bonds has bombed and been dubbed as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And it goes without saying that it would be impossible to maintain anonymity in a setup like ours, that the government will not know who is given money to whom and how much. Of course, we've talked over the years, one has followed this. There have been dozens of reports and on electoral reforms, and state funding is one of the subjects that has been bandied about as a panacea on electoral reforms, but we all know it is a non-starter. So in the final analysis, I will say, elections in India are too precious to be weighed against money, important though money is. On the electoral process, I'd like to say two things two issues of huge concern which have emerged of late. One is the credibility of the Election Commission of India, which has come into question. And this is a very sad development, because whoever has sat in that chair has, जैसे कहते हैं ना, छाती चौड़ी हो गई. And the world watched the Election Commission of India conduct elections in this huge country in a reasonably fair and free manner, from TN session to right down to. So questions to be now asked about the credibility of the Election Commission is something that disturbs many people. And the second is the growing suspicion that EVMs may be manipulated. The opposition, of course, lacks credibility when it raises these issues after losing an election. And they invariably do that, rather than de-link it from election and raise it as an issue on which they create a movement. And some of the opposition parties have talked about this. But given the doubts in many minds, and I again have traveled recently in the last year or two particularly, even in the villages now, I meet people, I hear people, not small in number, who say, I have voted this way, but I don't know whether the EVM will allow it to register it that way. And this is now, the apprehensions then are not limited to the political parties anymore. So these are issues that need a re-look by the Election Commission, because Caesar's wife must be above suspicion for the credibility and sanctity of our election process, which we all have been so proud of. Now, Manik, I was talking to, and we remember Justice Tarkunde had been greatly exercised about the need to bring electoral reforms. And Manik talked about a report also. She said it must be somewhere around. And she'll try and lay her hands on it. He was, of course, exercised about electoral reforms. So was Jai Prakash Narayan. It was one of the 4-point agenda in the 1973-74 Bihar movement that he captained against corruption. And then, of course, concerned about the social and political fragmentation caused by caste and community in the first past the post system. Krishan Kant in the 80s had advocated that there should be a final runoff between the two candidates who polled the highest number of votes. So there would be two tiers to this election. It's not the representative list system, but the idea was that the winner would have to poll more than 50% of the vote to be victorious. This would compel parties to take steps to unite groups rather than to divide. And if you look at it, if you look at the recent elections, a number of places where you've had two main contenders, essentially, then you have 8 to 10 independents, and they've been fielded by various people to be vote katwas. So such a system will put out the vote katwas and leave you with your two people who then you have to choose between the two of them who polls more than 50%, more than half the votes. Anyway, these and other ideas need to be discussed and rediscussed. Though we all know it is not the dearth of ideas, but the lack of a political will that has been the problem. But the only way to address this is to create public pressure on our rulers, on our politicians. And the time may have come for a citizens' initiative once again on strengthening our electoral processes. And the one nation, one election, agree with it, disagree with it, provides us an opportunity to do so. Recently, a Sikh taxi driver in Delhi told me, वोट को सही नहीं रखेंगे तो शहीद भगत सिंह पैदा हो जाएंगे. पैदा होंगे कि नहीं मुझे मालूम नहीं, but it may reflect a changing shift in the ground level opinion today vis-a-vis our vote, vis-a-vis our elections. So just to sum up, while we need to have a full and widespread and vigorous discussion on all the issues that have been raised by One Nation, One Election, we should not view frequent elections as a burden. If it strengthens our democracy, makes for greater participation of the people, enhances the accountability of our leaders, all that will pay us rich dividends. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. We could not have had a better view on this entire election process. But there is always a hope. We had a speaker today who has come from the emergency days. And it reminds me of a couplet from Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Faiz Ahmed Faiz was once arrested and he was put behind bars. And this couplet has two words which I should explain. Sabah means morning breeze and Zinda means the prison. So Faiz wrote, Sabah ne phir dare zinda pe aake di dastak. Sabah ne phir dare zinda pe aake di dastak. Seher qareeb hai, dil se kaho na ghabraye. Before I call our president to give his presidential speech, let me also give this tribute to Mr. Tarkunde. He wanted our country like this, which is written by Allama Iqbal, few of his lines. चिश्ती ने जिस ज़मीं पे में पैगाम हक़ सुनाया, नानक ने जिस चमन में वहदत का गीत गाया, यूनानियों को जिसने हैरान कर दिया है था, सारे जहां को जिसने इल्म हुनर दिया था, मेरा वतन वही है, मेरा वतन वही है. I call upon my president, Mr. Justice Madan Lokur, to give his presidential address. Thank you so much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Tarkunde Memorial Foundation and on behalf of all of us, I thank Ms. Neerja Chaudhary for a delightful lecture on the electoral process and the idea of one nation, one election. The issue is topical and is being hotly debated across the country. We have had the benefit of an objective assessment of the range of issues being discussed nationwide. I hope the views expressed by our eminent speaker will be considered by Parliament and concerned citizens before a final decision is taken on the bill already presented in Parliament. It's a complicated affair requiring not only amendments to the law, but also some constitution amendments. We are here today in memory of Justice Tarkunde, who was not only an eminent jurist, but also a prolific writer. As the editor of The Radical Humanist, he authored a couple of 100 editorials and wrote perhaps an equal number of articles. I often wonder how he managed his time to achieve the tremendous output of words and thoughts. The Memorial Foundation is making an effort to collect his writings and bring them out in as many volumes as it may take. The task is gargantuan, and I expect it to take a year or two. In the meanwhile, the Memorial Foundation has been able to arrange for the publication of the 14 memorial lectures delivered so far. There has been some delay, partly due to copyright issues, but hopefully the text of these lectures will be available next year, including today's wonderful lecture. These lectures cover a variety of subjects and will be of interest not only to those in the legal fraternity, but just about everybody. Justice Tarkunde has written extensively on the electoral process, and in a paper published in the Radical Humanist in January 1994, he drew attention to the collection of black money to meet the mounting expenses of periodic elections. The electoral bonds scheme, which was struck down by the Supreme Court as being unconstitutional, was perhaps intended to eliminate black money, as was demonetization. But I'm not sure whether they achieved any success. Justice Tarkunde also adverted to the criminalization of politics and the unholy alliance between politicians, the local administration, and antisocial elements. More importantly, he wrote, and I quote, "We have reached a stage when a genuine apprehension has arisen that communal animosities, particularly between Hindus and Muslims, would be fomented for political gains to such an extent that Indian democracy itself may be replaced by an indigenous variety of fascism." I wonder whether the one nation, one election laws will address these concerns voiced about 30 years ago by Justice Tarkunde. Justice Tarkunde advocated the idea of grassroots democracy through people's committees, which could, in a way, be substituted by panchayats constituted under the 73rd Amendment of the Constitution. In due course of time, the panchayats could demand representation in the state legislatures and the Lok Sabha. He hoped, and I quote, "The present harmful system of unprincipled political parties scrambling for power would be replaced by people's representatives nominated by truly democratic panchayats and elected with the support of such panchayats," unquote. In another article published in October 1993, Justice Tarkunde discusses various electoral systems but rejects them as being unsuitable to Indian conditions. For example, the single transferable vote system prevailing in Ireland and Australia is too complicated for the parliamentary form of elections because of numerically massive electorates, while in these countries, the electorates are much smaller and more educated. The two-round voting system introduced by General de Gaulle in France is worthy of consideration, in the opinion of Justice Tarkunde, since it more correctly reflects the wishes of the electorate and is otherwise simple. This was adverted to by Ms. Chaudhary today. However, the drawback is that rather than facing problems only in one election, the problems may have to be faced a second time in the two-round voting system, thereby making the process impracticable. Justice Tarkunde also discussed the system of proportional representation practiced in Germany, but felt that it did not maintain a direct link between the voters and their candidates. But he was not averse to it, with some modifications. He also discussed the system of indirect elections. He felt that the advantage of such a system, starting from the Gram Panchayat level to Parliament, would recognize that Gram Panchayats are the real repositories of power in the state, and even Parliament consists of representatives of these primary local republics. In his view, a suitable combination of proportional representation and indirect elections may be the best electoral system for Indian democracy. There is considerable food for thought in today's lecture by our eminent speaker, and in the views expressed by Justice Tarkunde a few decades ago. We can only hope that other alternatives to the idea of one nation, one election are objectively explored and considered with sincerity and suitably incorporated wherever necessary. Thanking you once again, Ms. Neerja Chaudhary, and thank you for being here.
I will now request Mrs. Manik Karanjawala, daughter of Mr. Tarkunde, and Ms. Niharika Karanjawala to come and give a shawl to our speaker for her to join us this evening. I will now request our president to give a memento to our speaker today. And I will request all members of Tarkunde Memorial Foundation to come in the front for a photo.
Yeah.
I will now request Ms. Tahira Karanjawala to propose a vote of thanks.
Good evening, Ms. Neerja Chaudhary, Honorable Justice Madan Lokur, Mr. Raju Ramachandran, Honorable Judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, past and present, learned senior advocates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the entire Tarkunde Memorial Committee, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Ms. Neerja Chaudhary, who has taken time out of her busy schedule to be with us today to celebrate the memory of my grandfather, who himself enjoyed nothing more than a good political or legal debate. Your thought-provoking and nuanced address on this subject will certainly give us the insight and the context we need as we watch events unfold in Parliament on this very crucial issue. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us today. I would also like to extend our deepest gratitude to Honorable Justice Madan Lokur, our President, and Mr. Raju Ramachandran, our Vice President, for all their guidance and invaluable advice in undertaking all the work that the Tarkunde Memorial Committee undertakes, including organizing the lecture today. I would also like to thank LiveLaw and Bar and Bench for their coverage of this event so that it may be made available to people who could not be present with us today. And lastly, I would like to thank all of you, our distinguished audience. Many of you have very busy schedules but have taken out time to be with us today. Thank you very much. I wish you a good evening and a very happy festive season ahead.
Thank you. Hope we meet again, but we can't less than 4 days.